Good morning, everybody. This is Anthony Sanchez. I'm from Customers First Now, and I want to thank you this morning for joining our webinar, our CX Leader webinar this month. We have a great presentation ready for you. Today we have our CEO at Customers First Now, Carrie Nelson, and she's going to be introducing and discussing with one of our panelists on the presentation today. But before we get started, I just wanted to remind everybody that we love getting your questions. And so if you have questions at any time during the webinar at all, just go to your questions panel on the GoToWebinar control panel and just type in your questions, and we'll get to them right after we finish with our slides. So again, thanks for joining, and I'm going to now hand it over to Carrie so we can get started.
Thank you, Anthony, and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us this month. So our special guest today is Lisa Ohm, who's one of my all-time favorite CX partners I've loved working with. And Lisa has a lot of experience, and what we're talking about today is really digital, which is really, I know, a hot topic for many of you. And the thing I think you'll hear from Lisa, which is really important in any kind of CX program, whether you're doing digital, B2B, B2C, however you're doing it, is really the connection to the people, both inside the company and outside the company. And this is something Lisa's done very well. When I first met her, I mean, she was as concerned with her team and the organization and how she was going to bring them together as important as what the data was telling her and what tools she was using and what the customers were saying. So I think that's really going to be the point for today's discussion, and we look forward to any questions you all have with us. So further here, you know, there's a Forrester always is writing on digital CX, and I just read their most recent one. And I think the biggest thing is they're emphasizing this point, which I think we all really understand, is it's not just about a technology and the data and analyzing it to death to tell you what's going on. It's really understand the customer and their human behavior. And again, this is what I want you all to listen for as Lisa goes through her learnings. And when we think about what is digital CX, it's the sum of all these digital interactions. And what really is the goal you're looking at? Is it customer walkaways? Is it purchases? I mean, what's your outcome you're driving towards? Understanding their journey, the behaviors, the motivations. Again, it gets back to, you know, your target customer, and then really looking at how those touch points, you know, come back inside the organization and who owns those and who's, you know, really going to be responsible for fixing them. And then the last one is really making it easy and fun. And if you look at this, if we go to the chart, I just want to show, because it's easy, fun. You know, when we look at over the next 5 years, that was one of the most important things as we look at what to differentiate is it should be, you know, easy, fun, valuable, pleasurable to shop. I mean, you want things to be easy to do business with is the real point here. So with that, we'll go over to Lisa to talk about some of the trends. And Lisa will take you through her experience, and then we'll open it up to Q&A.
Sure. So I think these are some of the high levels, which many of you are, I'm sure, well versed in. But the idea that CX really is a competitive advantage for an organization. Think about the stores that you like to shop at, you know, the difference in the experience of Target or Walmart, and really people are voting on experience with their dollars. The next big trend, I would say, is understanding humans, and as Carrie said, this is something I'll definitely touch on. It's as much about understanding how you treat each other in your organization as you treat your customers. And then certainly integrating analytics. And I like to use this one thoughtfully and strategically. I think you can at times overanalyze things that you're missing the point on the human emotion. But I think from digital specifically, you have far more analytics at your disposal, and it's really important to use them as a guide more so than a Bible, I would say. And then last is personalization. It's just the way of the world and the way of digital now. It's what customers expect. Amazon has really reinvented this, and it's something you really need to tackle in your CX approach. So I wanted to just start by, at a high level, talking about the CX strategy, but even before I jump into that, really talking about the main problem we were trying to solve in this particular project. It was an e-commerce site, but our challenge was really more a cultural challenge as much as it was a product challenge. We had built a culture of being charmed by bright, shiny objects and making decisions based on technology versus the customer. And we'd really spent probably 18 months to 24 months where our development teams and engineers were making more of the decisions based on what was the latest tool or the technology or what should the tech stack be. And we were moving so fast that what we really neglected was to take a step back and understand what our customers needed for us. So my challenge was to reprioritize our product roadmaps and how we thought about, our e-commerce enhancement decisions based on the customer versus the technology. So ultimately, my first goal was to create a strategy and get executive buy-in. And thankfully, I had a great partnership with Forrester to help me think through the early stage of the strategy. And I had not actually had CX in my title per se, but I'd been doing it for years. I have 18 years, digital marketing, digital transformations, product marketing, and I think CX was something I was doing all along the way, but it now had a fancy new title. So anyway, Forrester really helped me to think about the strategy and how to approach this challenge. And ultimately, it took me 2 months of hearing a lot of no's from our C-suite, but got to a point where my persistence really got them to buy in. And our strategy was to create a value-based prioritization to product roadmaps that exceeded customer expectations through listening and capturing customer feedback, intuitive design, and iterative execution. So I think that's a nice fancy statement, but what does that really mean? I've sat on a lot of these webinars before, and so I wanted to go into what each of these pillars really meant for our organization so you had something to take away. The first was listen, and this is really where I focused the strategy to start. I hired a market research manager to execute journey maps and CSAT surveys and customer panels. And in personally taking a journey mapping training session with Customer First Now, I met Carrie, and Carrie really took our strategy to the next level and helped me get the tactical approach down of, the exact steps I needed to take. And so from the listen bucket, the goal was to create a research team to capture customer feedback and turn it into actionable insights, not just actually get the data, but what does it mean and what is it telling us? And I won't belabor going through this whole detailed list, but I wanted you to see it so that you understand what the research team did. It was ultimately 2 people, one person who was really owning the analytics and the assessment and how we were going to elevate that information to our executive team, and another person really executing the tools from the on-site feedback tool to the journey mapping sessions and whatnot. And they were basically a partnership that became the research team. So all the research is great, but if you don't do anything with it, it's sort of a waste of an investment, and what's the point? So the next big step was, how do I get some authority and accountability for actual product changes? And so there was a big decision that took a good month of convincing to actually move the UX design team, which sat with the product and engineering team, into my CX team. And their job was ultimately to design best-in-class, intuitive online experiences that respond to those customer insights. And this was a big debate among our leadership for quite some time, but my persistence was around how can I actually have some skin in the game on starting the product improvement process in the design if I don't have people to do it. So this was a big win and ultimately allowed me to get a hand in what the product improvements would be. And then the third bucket here around execute was, once we sort of got our insights and were designing towards it, I didn't actually have any development or engineering people to make the changes. So there was still a lot of influence and begging for favors and whatnot to really make the feedback, to address the feedback on the site and change the roadmap. And ultimately, I was able to get the web operations team and a front-end developer on my staff. And his job was really execute those website designs and partner with product and dev. So he sat with the dev team, but ultimately reported to me, which allowed me, again, to have some more authority to make decisions about what we would ultimately change on the site and how we would prioritize those things. Yeah, so the next big thing I wanted to touch on was how did we know it was working and how did we know it was successful? So in the roadmap I'm talking about to really build that team was about a 3 to 4 month process. And so our short-term KPIs, these were things that I held myself accountable to show our leadership team we were making progress, were first build a customer satisfaction survey, field it, and make sure we got at least a 2% response rate. I think benchmark is 1 to 3%, and we wanted to be somewhere in the middle. But we ended up with over 1,500 responses, which was clearly statistically significant data to help us, start to figure out what those pain points were. The other thing we wanted to do was just set benchmarks for NPS and overall satisfaction, because we had never done it before and we needed a place to start so that we could prove that my team was actually having an impact. And then we ultimately wanted to define the top 5 critical product needs. What we ended up doing with our survey was identifying over 200 needs. And instead of really defining the top 5, Carrie was really instrumental in helping us think through this. But we basically mapped all of the pain points we had discovered on a grid, and the x-axis was the difficulty for the engineering and development team to execute, and the y-axis was customer delight and customer impact. And ultimately, we focused on the things in the top left box were the most delightful to customers and the easiest to execute. And that's where having that front-end developer on my team really made a huge difference, because we didn't just define 5, we defined 50 things that my team in their own, in an autonomous way could just go and make these things happen. So that was really, really critical. And then the other thing, we ended up with over 400 people who had opted in for future research. So we were able to create panels based on our personas to actually, do product testing before it went live and really get their feedback. So, those were some really big wins in our early days. Longer term, obviously, we had to drive the business. And so our longer term KPIs, and this was after a year I was held accountable to these things, but we had to drive more frequent repeat purchases per user. So we had a benchmark and we had a percentage we had to over deliver on that. We had to grow revenue by increasing the average lifetime value per user. And then last, a big one for me that I was really passionate about was increase site engagement and the number of features used per customer. So, and I think this is a no-brainer, but the more people engage with your product and your experience, the more invested they are in it. So those were, really the big ones to define what good looks like. Next slide. This is just a little bit of a different way of looking at it based on the Forrester model. As I said, our strategy was really to go from being a technology-led or customer-led organization. And some of the ways that we did that were, these were some of the boxes I needed to check to make sure we were going in the right direction. But we needed to ensure we had executive sponsorship, and not just sponsorship, but that our leadership team was putting their money where their mouth was and making investments in people and tools and setting our teams up for success. The other thing that was really important, and a lot of these learnings I actually got from Carrie, was around what is the dashboard to hold everyone accountable and really share across the organization what we were doing. And then certainly communication plans. It can't just be a one and done. You have to, much like marketing, beat people over the head with it and make sure they saw it 3 times in their day to remember it. And then share the insights we were getting. Another one I came up with, which I was pretty proud of, was we mandated, and it was our president that mandated, every employee in the office had to shadow a customer service rep for 2 hours per quarter. And that really stemmed from an insight I had early on, where before we even went on this journey, we had to ask ourselves as an organization 3 questions. And I found that these 3 questions were really indicative of, did we have an appetite and an opportunity to go down this CX road? And the 3 questions were, and this was for internal people in the organization to answer, but are we customer focused as an organization? Do we respond to our customers in a timely manner? And most importantly, do we respond to each other in a timely manner? And that was incredibly eye-opening to our organization, that we actually weren't treating ourselves in a respectful and thoughtful way, or a strategic way for that matter. And that was really impacting our culture. That basically told us, yes, we had a huge opportunity to do better. And then the second big one here was, how do you go from data rich to insight focused? And having worked in digital my entire career, I often see organizations that get so fixated on the data that they sort of lose sight of the intuition and the human and what else is happening. So we really tried to make sure we were not only taking the online survey feedback, but how are we integrating things that our customer service reps were hearing on the phone that didn't translate into a data point? And how are we making sure we balanced our online data with customer panels and focus groups, and really talking to customers and getting out there? Every trade show that I could attend, I would set up my own booth and give tchotchkes just to talk to customers. And that's where a lot of our insight came from. And then the last big one was, how do you go from siloed squads to really collaborative roadmaps and collaborative planning? And one of the things I did there was create a steering team with, 1 or 2 representatives from each of the major departments that had a stake in the product, and led a bi-weekly meeting, just letting them know our progress, answering any of their questions. And then we had our KPIs. I only showed you a handful, but there was probably 10 more on there, where we integrated KPIs for the development team and the big data team and all these other teams that had one CX KPI for them to make sure they had some skin in the game from a performance review perspective. And then the last big one I would say was, we held a global customer service summit where we had a number of representatives across the organization come to our headquarters for 2 days and just sit down and talk, align on what tools we were going to use, what was our process, align on KPIs. And, it was a tremendous amount of work for me and sort of hard to wrangle everybody in. But I think coming out of that 2-day summit was far greater alignment across the organization. And then last for my slides, I really just wanted to leave you with the proof is in the pudding in terms of what we did. We grew our website traffic 140%, and that was actually with less marketing investment. So it wasn't just that we were spending more, it was really that we were driving those repeat customers and people coming back and referral, and our NPS went up. And then conversion rate drastically increased. We really focused on, from an NPS perspective, we focused on the passives in terms of their feedback, because I think, as many of you know, it's much easier to move passives to promoters. And so I think that really helped with getting people to come back and buy again. And then our revenue overall increased. Now, some of that is obviously growth of the business, but a great majority of that was people coming back and spending more and the repeat customer.
So I just want to remind everybody that if you have any questions now, please submit them through the questions panel. And just, Lisa, could you clarify on this slide, when you say conversion rate, was this conversion of purchase product online?
Correct. So visitors to purchase.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
So Lisa, I mean, having worked with you and seen you do this, the thing I always say to everyone, when you see it kind of laid out and you have someone like Lisa tell you, it's like, yes, it seems like, yeah, I can do that. But it is really hard. And I saw some of the challenges, Lisa was going through. And I always say, the thing you look for is the right leader, the right talent. And my question to you is, you talked about your team and building that team over a 3 to 5 month period. What do you look like? What do you look for in talent? Like, what is the most important skills or competencies that are important when you're building your teams to do this type of work? Because this is a lot about change management. So
Yeah.
what do you look for?
Good question. I mean, I think you can look up job descriptions on LinkedIn or anywhere, from a research manager to a UX designer. But more than anything, I really looked for people with tenacity and just sheer grit to drive something through, because I can tell you 9 out of 10 days I was pushing and pushing and persisting and not getting in the meeting or having the meeting canceled. And so I think it's a labor of love, and it's somebody who truly, truly wants to create a better experience for a customer. I mean, I kind of attribute my career success to that. I have never been, the smartest person when it comes to technology in the room. I haven't been the greatest marketer, but I will tell you, I am probably the most tenacious, and I don't take no for an answer. And I think I empathize with customers, and I always kind of joke that I'm the least common denominator. So if I can understand how to use some functionality on a website, our customers will. And so, for me, it's people who are going to drive it and get stuff done and be resourceful.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's what I saw in you from the beginning, and I think that is really part of Lisa's success in what she did, is the team she brought on, and in the not saying no, not taking no for an answer. I remember hiring a leader once who said if someone, told her no, she would find a window to go through to make it happen if she believed it. And I think that's a really important thing from a sheer competency and will. One of the things that we did together that I thought was really great was when you looked at the buying experience, which, from a digital, this is something, you can go on other sites, you can see what people are doing. But one of the things I just wanted you to highlight for everyone is, one of the things I thought you did really well was you just didn't look at your competition. It's like I always say, if I spent when I led CX, looking at the competition, we would be mediocre at best. I mean, I was in an industry, none of us were good. So what I liked about what you were doing is you were looking at the Amazons, you were looking at others, and you were saying, let's compare ourselves to these. So can you just kind of give people how you thought about comparing that buying experience and kind of just some of your takeaways when you did that work?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think from our executive team, it was always go after competitor A or competitor B. And having spent my whole career in digital, I always had this approach that if it's already out there, you're a year too late. And so the idea was, just playing a copy me too. I think in digital, if you feel comfortable launching a product, you're too late. You've already waited too long. And so the idea that not just looking at, other e-commerce competitors in our industry, but, Amazon and Spotify and, Apple, all these different user experiences have really created a way that customers behave online. And it goes back to that human behavior, which is we all have a perceived way. Any of us picks up our cell phone. We know exactly what app we're going to go to. There's a way we swipe there, and those behaviors are so ingrained. If anybody has recently changed their cell phone or switched from Android to Google, it's like that first 4 or 5 days makes you a crazy person because you expect a certain behavior and how you're going to log on. So for me, I really challenged us to not just look at our competitors, but look at what was best in class and really, and then another lesson I would say we learned in that process is we really overthought the things like creating content and marketing and what was our story. And we spent so much time on that stuff because we thought the e-commerce best practice was the easy part. And I think as an organization to redo it, we would have reversed that because not to minimize marketing, I have marketing in my DNA, but writing a story you can rewrite and rewrite, but recoding a customer journey in an e-commerce experience is a far bigger investment that we should have paid more attention to the details on.
That is a great point. And one of the things, I remember back in the early 2000s where, to your point of kind of best practices, I was working in a very traditional B2B, but we had a website, we had online and SaaS products, where they were just coming out. And I remember in our surveys, we started getting customers telling us, well, why can't your search be more like Google?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember the executive team looking at me going, well, don't they know who we are? I said, they don't care.
They don't care. They don't care.
They don't care. They're now experiencing something so different. And I think your point of staying, this whole idea of test and learn, be curious, be, open to something that you don't think is, kind of the standard. And I think that you've done very well.
And really the devil's in the details. I think when we did that, when you guys executed that buying research for us, where you looked at a number of different sites and just literally took screenshots of what exact screen is,
called for customer service and all
and
that.
did that analysis. It was like really basic things, like in terms of your checkout, where do you put your address? What fields is it? When do you give a receipt? What is the receipt telling the customer? Like that stuff is make or break in terms of
do you have
the
a
experience,
confirmation,
right?
To the order.
Absolutely. What is the headline? What is the subject line of the email that's coming over as your confirmation? All of those details are where you really have a defining experience that people come to expect.
That's right. No, that's great. And I think any questions coming in online?
We have one, but you can continue.
Okay. So the other one I would just have is kind of just to say, if you had to pick kind of one of your biggest challenges or learnings, what would be that piece of advice for folks?
I think probably the biggest one was, what is the right data to tell the story you want? And I think we quickly got customer satisfaction feedback, right? And this sort of goes back to the Henry Ford quote, if I had listened to customers, I would have built faster horses, right? So there is a big difference in what customers say they're doing and what they're actually doing. And so I was so passionate about this, and I'm like, look, there's so much feedback and it's so awful, and yes, this means there's opportunity, and instead I should have taken the feedback and then, and I learned this later, I actually had to go back and do this, but sometimes the data is too hard to believe, or there's a lot of naysayers and people who are suspect of what you're showing them. But when I engaged the big data team and said, okay, map exactly the behavior the customers were taking relative to their NPS score, or relative to how much they, what they were saying and how much they actually spent, what we uncovered was our most loyal, our whales, the people who spent the most money, were actually the most dissatisfied. And what we found was that they were forced to use the site because we were a vendor to their company. They didn't actually have switching ability and power. So the giant aha that really got our executive support was, our most loyal customers are the most dissatisfied. And when we matched their spending to the behavior, it was like overnight, everybody was ready to jump on board with the CX strategy.
Great. I love that.
That actually is related to the question that we did get in.
Okay, great.
Which is, you were talking about your executives, and they'd like to know, how did you change the minds and convince your executives to allow your CX programs to go forward? Was it ROI or money?
I would go back to the tenacity. I probably just annoyed the heck out of them. But I think when I hit roadblocks with our executive team, I went to the people. I talked to the product owners. I talked to the head of customer service. I really infiltrated the teams to get them on board, because then it wasn't just me saying, we need this, we need this, we need this, and this is my big, bright, shiny idea. I really spent the time, and a lot of time, taking the right people to lunch, talking to the right product owners, talking to the right engineers, and really got people, I would say, at the middle management level and people who were actually making the day-to-day decisions in terms of the weeds to get on board and started doing the work even before we had the approval. And then I think once there was actually a moment, I remember that our president and we had a hallway conversation, and his exact words were, "I don't know what you're doing around here, but it's a movement." And I was like, I got chills thinking like, it's all working. He may not be on board yet, but it's working, So I think, and again, back to the analogy of if one door's closed, find a window. Like, you just have to persist. There's going to be a heck of a lot of no's before you get to a yes. And change your approach, change your story. And back to the data, like, tell the story that the executives need to hear first, even before your own story to support the cause, because half of my job was influencing versus really having the authority to do it.
Well, and I think this is really important. I had somebody ask me this question the other day, how is what you're going to do different than what we've done? And, at the end of the day, I don't know. I mean, it's exactly what Lisa's saying is the teams and the companies I see very successful in getting to the ROI, they have people like Lisa who have literally created a movement, a buy-in cross-functionally, because this stuff is way too hard to do if you're trying to do it within your own silo. And so I think the big thing to always look out for is if someone keeps asking you for the ROI, the thing you have to ask back is, you need the support, top down, bottoms up, to go deliver it. Because I could say, here's the ROI you're going to get if you actually do it. But you got to do it. And I think that's the biggest point here is if you strictly sell on ROI, I think it's a very dangerous sign.
Yep.
And I remember one of our customers who's presented on our webinars. She created a GoFundMe account. She made every executive literally,
awesome.
Here's what I need. Here's what the project's going to cost. Now I need each of you to go into your budgets and help.
Yeah.
And by doing, she didn't say, here's the ROI. She's like, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it. This is what it's going to look like. But she started it. It's like a similar thing. She had everyone to put their money where their mouth is, or to your point, Lisa, you got everyone to put their energy and their resource where you wanted them to go. But that's how you make a program like this successful, because it's hard. You just, I think that I love this story and what you've done, but it was a lot of work of what you did.
Yeah, and I think if you actually go back to what budget did I get and what people did I get, right? It looks like this amazingly big organization. It ended up being, I think, 11 people, but only 2 of those people were new hires.
Yeah.
What I did through influence was convince people to let me take on other parts of the organization that were historically outside of my responsibility. So it didn't really cost the company anything, but it changed, my accountability and my ability to have authority. So, the real cost that the company did approve was a feedback tool, which you can go as high or low as you want in terms of finding that. But the changes we did were over time and they were subtle. I didn't come through the door with, I need 12 people, I need $200,000, I need this. I came in with, give me one person. And in 3 months, I'll do this. And give me another person. And then in another 2 months, I'll do this. And, I helped make the decisions easier because the investment and the risk was pretty low. And, a year later, I had a 12-person organization and a tool and, a pretty well-oiled machine.
That's all the questions we have.
Good.
Any other questions from you?
No, I think this covered the key points. And, I think when, we see the topic of digital, I think the biggest thing comes back to, it really is just another form to engage customers, but also your team members. It's, to me, it's just there's a balance between, it's always the people, the process, the technology, and the people are so important to this. So, any final words of wisdom, Lisa?
Yeah, I would just say don't underestimate where you can get good insights. It's not just about the feedback on the website, but go talk to people in your organization, talk to the customer service reps, talk to the engineering person who's been working on the product for 2 years and has, you know, many of her own hangups that she'd love to change. But make it an open dialogue, and don't be afraid of hearing things are bad. That just means you have a chance to improve them. If everything's great, then, you know, you probably don't have as much job security. So right, really dig for insights in lots of places, and don't just rely on, you know, your data and your insights from one place.
Love it. Thank you so much for joining us. Anthony, you can close out.
Lisa, great presentation and really great insights. I think our audience is really going to love that. And I just want to remind everybody that all of our previous webinar sessions are available at our website at customersfirstnow.com/events. If you have any additional questions about today's session, or if you wanted to speak to any of our CX practitioners about VOC or CX improvement or journey mapping, just email me at the email that's showing on your screen, marketing@customersfirstnow.com, and I'll get back to you immediately, and we can set something up. Thank you, everybody, for joining today, and we'll be sending out the link within a couple of days from today. So Thanks again, everybody.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.